How did a starving, homeless tribe, forced to eat snakes in a swamp, somehow managed to create the most advanced city on the planet? How on earth did they pull that off? It's a mind-blowing question that resonates through history, filled with tales of resilience, destiny, and an unstoppable drive to thrive against all odds. We begin our journey in the cool air of the high central Mexican plateau, where the waters of ancient Lake Texcoco reflect the snow-capped peaks of silent volcanoes. The air here is thin and crisp. The light is golden, casting long, serene shadows across a landscape that holds secrets buried deep beneath the earth. If you are enjoying our journey into the past, please take a moment to subscribe. And I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what time is it on your clock? Settle in now, pull the covers up, and let the modern world fade away as we travel back to the dawn of the fifth sun. Welcome to Sleeping Scribe, where calming history stories help you unwind and gently fall asleep. Tonight, we're flipping to the very first page, way before the gold and glory, to discover a people on the hunt for a home. Long before the stone temples rose to pierce the sky, and long before the great markets hummed with the voices of 1,000 merchants, there was only the wind. It blew across the northern lands, a place mythical and distant, known in the ancient tongues as Aztec. The name itself carries a sense of purity and stillness. It translates to the place of whiteness, or perhaps the place of herons. We can imagine it now, a land of shallow waters and white reeds, where great white birds took flight against a slate-gray sky, their wings beating a slow, rhythmic tempo. It was a paradise of sorts, but it was not their destiny. The people who lived there were the Azteca, named after this white land of their birth. But the gods are rarely content to let their chosen people rest in comfort. Deep within the earth, in a place called Chicamostoc, or the place of 7 caves, a new fate was stirring. Imagine the sound of water dripping in the darkness of a limestone cavern. Plip, plip, plip. It is a cool, damp darkness. From these 7 wombs of the earth, 7 tribes emerged, blinking into the sunlight. They were the Nahua peoples, destined to shape the history of Mexico. But one tribe, the last to leave, was different. They lingered. They waited. It was the year 1 Flint, or 1168, by our modern reckoning, when the call finally came. It did not come as a shout, but as a whisper in the hearts of the high priests. Their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird of the south, demanded they move. Huitzilopochtli was a solar deity, a warrior god, fierce and demanding. His effigy was not a massive stone idol, but a sacred bundle, carried on the backs of 4 chosen priest-bearers, known as the Teamama. These priests walked with heavy steps, the weight of their god pressing down on their shoulders, their eyes fixed on the horizon. And so, they walked. The migration was not a march of days or weeks. It was an odyssey of centuries. Just imagine the dust rising from thousands of sandals, shuffling across the arid scrubland. The sun beat down on their backs, relentless and bright. They were nomads now. They hunted what they could, finding sustenance in the harsh landscape. They gathered wild plants. They wore the skins of animals. They hunted, their appearance growing wild and rugged, mirroring the land they traversed. At a place called Coatepec, a significant event occurred that would sever their ties to the past forever. A great tree stood there, ancient and sprawling. As the people ate beneath its shade, the tree suddenly snapped. A thunderous crack echoed through the camp. It was a sign. Huitzilopochtli spoke to his priests in the silence of the following night. He told them that they must separate from the other tribes. They were to walk alone. To seal this new identity, the god gave them a new name. No longer were they the Azteca, the people of Aztlan. Now they were the Mexica. It was a name of power, a name of promise. But shedding the past is never without pain. In the legends, it is said they left behind Malinalxecatl, a sorceress and sister to their god. She was beautiful, but dangerous, skilled in the dark arts of the night. Leaving her behind while she slept was a choice of survival, a rejection of the chaotic magic of the past in favor of the disciplined destiny of the future. They continued south. Generations were born on the road. Children took their first steps on the dusty path, grew old, and were buried beside it, never seeing the promised land. All they knew was the rhythm of the huital drums urging them forward, and the promise that one day they would stop. The landscape began to change. The arid deserts gave way to pine forests, and finally, the great valley of Mexico opened up before them. It was a breathtaking sight, a vast basin cradled by mountains, with a massive system of interconnected lakes shimmering in the center. It looked like a jewel. It looked like home. But the Mexica were late. It was the mid-13th century. The valley was already full. Powerful city-states, civilized and wealthy, controlled the lakeshores. There was Azcapotzalco, the capital of the Tapanecs, bustling and strong. There was Culhuacan, proud of its Toltec heritage, refined and aristocratic. And here came the Mexica. They were dusty, dressed in animal skins, carrying their strange god, and speaking a dialect that sounded rough to the urbanized ears of the valley dwellers. They were the unwanted guests at a crowded feast. They tried to settle at Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshopper. It was a strategic spot, known for its fresh spring water, but their neighbors were hostile. They saw these wandering nomads as a threat, a chaotic element in their orderly world. The armies of the valley united against them. It was a massacre. The Mexica were scattered. Their chief, Huitzilopochtli, the elder, was captured and sacrificed. His life offered to gods who seemed deaf to the Mexica's pleas. Broken and humbled, the survivors went to the lord of Culhuacan, a king named Coxcox. They begged for land, any land. They offered to be his mercenaries, his servants, anything to have a place to rest their heads. Coxcox looked at these desperate people and saw an opportunity to be rid of them. He granted them the lands of Tizapon. Tizapon was not a gift, it was a death sentence. It was a desolate, volcanic wasteland. The ground was sharp, jagged rock that cut the feet. The air smelled of sulfur, but worst of all, it was infested with venomous snakes. Rattlesnakes coiled in the dry brush, their warning tails buzzing like dry rain. Vipers hid beneath the stones. Coxcox expected the snakes to kill the Mexica within weeks, but he underestimated the hunger of the wanderers. When the emissaries of Culhuacan returned months later to check on the dead, they found a thriving camp. The Mexica had not been eaten. They had eaten the snakes. They had roasted them, boiled them, and turned the venomous curse of the land into the fuel for their survival. "Look," the Mexica said, "we are still here." It was a testament to their grit. They were a people who could swallow poison and grow stronger. During these years, they served Culhuacan as warriors. They learned the ways of war from the best in the valley. They adopted the civilized manners of their masters. They began to believe they belonged. But the Mexica sought legitimacy. They wanted the blue blood of the Toltec kings, the ancient lineage that commanded respect. They asked Coxcox for his daughter, a princess, to marry their deity, or rather, to be part of a ceremony honoring him. Coxcox agreed. He sent his daughter, a young woman of noble birth, into the rough camp of the mercenaries. He imagined a grand wedding. He imagined a political alliance. He did not understand the Mexica. When Coxcox arrived for the festival, expecting to see his daughter on a throne, he entered the dark, smoky temple. The priests burned copal incense, the thick, white smoke curling around the stone pillars. A dancer emerged from the shadows. The dancer wore a garment that looked strangely familiar. As the light of the torches flickered, the king realized with a jolt of horror what he was seeing. The dancer was a priest, and he was wearing the flayed skin of the princess. It was not an act of malice in the eyes of the Mexica. It was a ritual of transformation. To them, she had become the goddess. She had been honored in the highest, most sacred way they knew, connected to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, associated with the god Toltec. But to the refined King Coxcox, it was an abomination. The scream of the king echoed through the night. "Kill them," he roared. "Kill them all." The Colhua army descended with fury. The Mexica, realizing the catastrophic cultural misunderstanding, grabbed their weapons and their children. They ran. They were chased to the edge of the water. Spears whistled past their ears. Shields shattered. There was nowhere to go but into the lake. They fashioned hasty rafts of reeds. They used their shields as paddles. They pushed out into the cold, muddy waters of Lake Texcoco, leaving the solid ground behind. They were outcasts once again, banished, hunted, floating in the gray mist of the lake, hiding among the rushes. They waited for the sun to rise. They paddled for days, moving deeper into the swampy heart of the lake, where no one else wanted to go. It was a place of mud and mosquitoes, of shallow water and swaying reeds. It was here, in the year 2 house, or 1325 AD, that the prophecy finally manifested. The priests, exhausted and starving, looked toward a small, rocky island in the center of the marshes. The sun was high, blazing down with a fierce intensity, and there, perched upon a prickly pear cacetza tenactli that grew from a stone, sat an eagle. It was a magnificent bird. Its feathers were dark brown and golden, rippling in the lake breeze. In its beak, and gripped within its talons, it held a serpent. The eagle screeched, spreading its massive wings toward the sun. This was it, the sign Huitzilopochtli had promised them. Go until you see the eagle devouring the snake. They fell to their knees in the mud. The centuries of wandering were over. The hunger, the rejection, the walking it. They named the place Tenochtitlan, the place of the prickly pear cactus. But a sign from the gods does not build a city. The reality of their new home was daunting. It was not a lush valley. It was a swamp. There was no stone for building, no wood for beams. There was only mud and water. Yet, the Mexica possessed an engineering genius born of necessity. If there was no land, they would make it. They drove massive wooden stakes deep into the soft lake bed, forming rectangular enclosures. They wove reeds between the stakes to create fences. Then, they dredged the nutrient-rich mud from the bottom of the lake and filled the enclosures. They created artificial islands. The first structure they built was not a palace, but a humble shrine to Huitzilopochtli. It was made of mud and reeds, simple and small. But the smoke of their copal incense rose from that tiny island, drifting across the water to the great cities on the shore. The neighbors watched with amusement. Let them rot in the swamp, they likely thought. They will drown or starve. But the city grew. The whitewater lilies that surrounded the island were pushed back as more land was created. They organized the city into 4 great quarters, or campen, representing the 4 directions of the universe. They knew that to be taken seriously, they needed a Kinga Tlatoani, or speaker. But they were still seen as upstarts. They needed royal blood. In a shrewd, diplomatic move, they reached out to the city of Culhuacan, the very people who had chased them into the water, and asked for a prince who carried the blood of the Toltecs. In 1376, Acamapichtli ascended the throne as the first true ruler of Tenochtitlan. Through him, the Mexica claimed the heritage of the ancient civilizations. They were no longer just nomads, they were the heirs to history. The city began to take shape. The squelch of mud was replaced by the tap-tap-tap of stone cutters. But a city needs freedom to grow, and the Mexica were still paying tribute to a tyrant. For decades, the Tapanecs of Azcapotzalco controlled the valley. Their elderly ruler, Tesazomoc, was a cunning warlord who kept the Mexica under his thumb. As long as Tesazomoc lived, the Mexica were vassals. They fought his wars. They paid him taxes in fish and frogs and crops. But time is the one enemy no king can defeat. Tesazomoc died, and chaos ensued. His son Maxilla seized power. Maxilla was not like his father. He was cruel, paranoid, and lacked the subtle touch of diplomacy. He saw the growing power of Tenochtitlan, and he felt fear. He decided to cut the head off the snake before it could bite. He assassinated the Mexica ruler, Chimalpopoca. It was a fatal mistake. Grief turned to cold, hard rage. The Mexica appointed a new leader, Itzcoatl, whose name meant obsidian serpent. Itzcoatl was a man of war. Standing beside him was the brilliant shadow, the advisor, Tlaquelo. Tlaquelo held the title of Cihuacatel, or Snake Woman, a high-ranking position second only to the king. He was the architect of the Aztec soul. We will not serve, Itzcoatl declared. We will not bow. But they could not fight Azcapotzalco alone. The Tepanic Empire was too vast, so the Mexica looked across the lake to the city of Texcoco. There they found Nezahualcóyotl, the hungry coyote. He was a poet, a philosopher, and a prince in exile. His own father murdered by the Tapanecs. He was hiding in the mountains, waiting for his moment. The Mexica sent messengers. An alliance was forged in the shadows. A third city, Tlacopan, a dissident Tepanic city, joined them. Together, they formed the Triple Alliance, the ex-con. The year was 1428. The war drums began to beat, not the rhythmic thrumming of migration, but the deep, chest-rattling boom of battle. The combined forces of Tenochtitlan and Texcoco marched on Azcapotzalco. The glint of obsidian blades, the Macuahuitl, flashed in the sunlight. These wooden swords, embedded with razor-sharp volcanic glass, could sever the head of a horse. The siege was brutal. The shouting of commands in Nahuatl, the whistle of sling stones, the crash of wooden shields. For over 100 days, the battle raged. But the resentment of the oppressed is a powerful fuel. The Triple Alliance broke the defenses. They stormed the city. The capital of the Tapanecs burned, the smoke darkening the sky over the lake, signaling the end of an era. The tyrant Maxtla was captured and sacrificed. The Tapanec Empire crumbled. In the aftermath, a new order was established. The spoils were divided. The land was distributed to the warrior class, creating a new nobility based on merit and valor. But Tlaquelo, the advisor, did something even more profound. He gathered the old history books, the codices of the conquered peoples, and even some of the Mexica's own early records, and he burned them. It is not fitting, he reportedly said, that the common people should know the paintings. The government would be defamed, and only error would spread over the land. He erased the history of their humiliation. He erased the years of eating snakes and hiding in caves. In their place, he commissioned a new history, a history that said the Mexica were always the chosen ones, the true heirs of the Toltecs, the masters of the world by divine right. The Triple Alliance was sealed. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. They clasped hands, but everyone knew who the senior partner was. The eagle had not just landed on the cactus. It had spread its wings to cover the entire valley. With their enemies defeated and their history rewritten, the Mexica could finally turn their attention to building a wonder of the world. The swamp would become a garden. The reed shrine would become a pyramid of stone. The wandering tribe was wandering no more. They were the Aztec Empire. We are about to witness the golden age of this civilization, but history is vast and full of stories. Is there another ancient culture or a specific historical mystery you would love to hear told in this style? Let me know in the comments, and I might just weave that tale for you next. At the center of this grid of canals and white stone rose the heartbeat of the empire. But to understand the heart, we must first understand the body that sustained it. The transformation of Tenochtitlan from a muddy islet into the Venice of the Americas is not just a story of construction. It is a story of defiance against nature itself. Imagine standing on the shore of Lake Texcoco in the year 1519. You look out toward the island city, and your breath catches in your throat. It seems to float upon the water like a mirage, a shimmering white jewel set against the deep azure of the lake. It does not look real, and yet it is solid. It is heavy with stone and life. Connecting this island to the mainland are the great causeways, or calzadas. These are not simple bridges. They are massive engineering feats, wide enough for 10 horses to ride abreast. They stretch for miles across the open water, linking the capital to the north, south, and west. As you walk along the causeway from Iztapalapa, you can feel the cool breeze coming off the lake. The road is straight as an arrow, paved with stucco so smooth and white it gleams in the sun. But the Mexica were warriors as well as engineers. They knew that a road that connects you to the world can also bring the world to your doorstep in the form of an army. And so, At intervals along these causeways, they built wooden drawbridges. These bridges allowed the free flow of canoe traffic beneath the road, but in times of war, they could be removed in minutes, turning the city into an impenetrable fortress surrounded by a moat of deep water. Looking over the edge of the causeway, you would see the true secret of the city's survival. These are often called floating gardens, but they did not truly float. They were anchored, built with a patience that defies modern comprehension. To create a chinampa, the farmers would weave a massive raft of reeds. They would float this raft to a shallow part of the lake and then sink it. Then they would dredge the nutrient-rich mud from the bottom of the canals, piling it onto the reeds until it broke the surface. To hold this new land in place, they planted awatoy trees, willow trees at the corners. These willows are water lovers. Their roots grow deep and fast, knitting the artificial island into the lakebed, creating a living retaining wall. The result was the most fertile farmland the world has ever seen. While a European farmer might be lucky to get one harvest a year, the Chinampa farmers of Tenochtitlan harvested 7 crops annually: maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, and flowers grew in riotous abundance. As you glide past in a canoe, the scent of the earth is rich and dark. You see farmers tending to the tall stalks of corn that seem to grow directly out of the water. It is a landscape of endless green stripes reflected in the mirror of the canals. But living in the middle of a saline lake presented a fundamental problem. You cannot drink salt water. The water surrounding the island was brackish, good for fish, but deadly for humans. The solution came from the mind of Nezahualcóyotl, the poet king of Texcoco. He designed a massive dike, 10 miles long, made of stone and timber. It sliced through the lake, separating the fresh spring waters of the south from the salty waters of the north. It acted as a gatekeeper, controlling the water levels to prevent flooding and keeping the water around the city sweet and clear. To bring drinking water to the populace, they built a twin-pipe aqueduct running from the springs of Chapultepec. It was a marvel of redundancy. There were 2 pipes made of terracotta. Only one was used at a time. When one pipe needed cleaning or repair, the water was diverted to the second, ensuring that the flow of fresh water never stopped. It is said the water pressure was so consistent that it sprang from the fountains in the city center with a joyful force. The city itself was a testament to order. While European cities of the time were often chaotic, muddy, and plagued by disease, Tenochtitlan was pristine. 1,000 men were employed daily just to sweep the streets and wash the stone pavements. There was no refuse in the canals. Waste was collected in canoes and transported to the mainland to be used as fertilizer. Public latrines were available in every neighborhood. To the Mexica, cleanliness was not just hygiene, it was a spiritual duty. The city was laid out in a grid, reflecting the order of the cosmos. Canals crossed with footpaths, creating a checkerboard of water and stone. The primary mode of transport was the canoe. It is estimated that on any given day, 200,000 canoes were moving on the lake. Imagine the sound, the gentle splashing of thousands of wooden paddles, the soft ripple of water against the hulls. It was a city of liquid movement, a Venice of the high mountains, but grander, cleaner, and brighter. At the center of this grid of canals and white stone rose the heartbeat of the empire, the sacred precinct, and towering above it all was the Huey Teocalli, the great temple. This was not merely a building. It was a mountain of stone built by human hands. It rose in tiers, a steep pyramid that dominated the skyline. But it was not built all at once. Like the layers of an onion, the great temple had been expanded 7 times, each ruler building a new shell over the old one, making it larger, grander, and closer to the heavens. When you stand at the base and look up, you have to tilt your head back until your neck aches. The stairs are incredibly steep, intentionally so. To climb them, you must lean forward, bowing your head, forcing a posture of humility and struggle. At the very summit, 2 shrines stood side by side, representing the fundamental duality of the Aztec world. On the left was the shrine of Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. His shrine was painted a vivid blue and white. It represented the cool, life-giving forces of nature, the water, the lightning, the growth of the maize. During the rainy season, the clouds would gather around the peaks of the volcanoes, and the rain would lash against the blue stucco of Tlaloc's house, flowing down the temple steps like a sacred river. On the right was the shrine of Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war. His shrine was painted a deep blood red and white. It represented the hot, dry season, the fire of the sun, and the warrior spirit that drove the empire. This duality, water and fire, life and death, agriculture and war, was the concept of a Taltalet Shnoli, or burning water. It was the symbol of war, but also the symbol of the cosmic balance that kept the universe moving. The temple was a recreation of the mythical Coatepec, the snake mountain where Huitzilopochtli was born. At the base of the stairs lay a massive stone disc, carving the image of Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess. In the myth, she had tried to kill her mother, but Huitzilopochtli sprang from the womb, fully armed, and defeated her, casting her down the mountain where she broke into pieces. The presence of this stone meant that every sacrifice performed at the summit was a reenactment of this cosmic drama. The temple was a stage, and the rituals performed there were believed to keep the sun moving across the sky. The atmosphere in the sacred precinct was thick with sensory intensity. The air was heavy with the smell of copal incense. It is a sweet, resinous scent, creating a permanent blue haze around the temples. The soundscape was dominated by the deep, booming rhythm of the huetl drums and the mournful cry of the conch shell trumpets, marking the hours of the day and night. The priests who tended these shrines were figures of awe and terror. They were not soft men of leisure. They lived lives of severe austerity. Their hair was never cut or washed, matted with black rubber and the blood of their self-sacrifice. They fasted often, slept little, and spent their nights in vigil, offering incense and prayers to the darkness. They were the keepers of the Teotl, the divine energy that flowed through all things. Near the temple stood the Tempantli, the rack of skulls. While gruesome to modern sensibilities, to the Mexica, it was a display of order and power. It was a political statement and a spiritual abacus, counting the debts paid to the gods to ensure the continued rising of the sun. While the priests maintained the cosmic balance, the citizens maintained a strict social balance on the ground. Tenochtitlan was a society of absolute discipline. It was not a place for the idle or the chaotic. From the moment a child was born, their path was guided by a rigorous set of laws and expectations. It was one of the few societies in the ancient world that had mandatory, universal education. Every child, boy or girl, noble or commoner, went to school. There were 2 types of schools. The Telpochcali was the house of youth, where the commoners, the Makaelton, learned the arts of war, history, and civic duty. Here, boys learned to handle the spear and the shield, to endure pain and cold, and to serve the community. The Commacac was the school for the nobility, the Pippleton. This was a place of intellectual rigor. Here, students learned to read the complex glyphs of the codices. They studied astronomy, tracking the movements of Venus and the Pleiades. They learned theology, poetry, and the art of rhetoric. The teachers were strict. A mistake in recitation could result in a stinging punishment with maguey thorns. The laws that governed adult life were equally severe. Drunkenness was considered a stain on society. For a young person to be found drunk in public, the punishment was death. There were no second chances. Only when a person reached the age of 70, when their service to the state was done, were they allowed to drink pulque freely. It was a privilege of old age, a reward for a lifetime of sobriety. Social status was visible at a glance. The length of your cloak, the material of your sandals, the jewelry you wore, everything was regulated. Nobles wore cotton, soft and dyed in vibrant colors. Commoners wore rough cloth made from maguey fibers. If a commoner dared to wear cotton or sandals in the royal palace, they could be executed. Yet it was not a caste system frozen in stone. A commoner could rise. The path to nobility was open to any man who showed exceptional bravery in battle. If you captured 4 enemies, you were elevated. You were given land, fine clothes, and a seat at the banquets. It was a meritocracy of blood and courage. Women, too, had their own battlefield. While they did not march to war, their role in the home was framed in military terms. Giving birth was considered a battle. A woman who died in childbirth was honored as a fallen warrior. She was believed to travel to the same heaven as the soldiers who died on the obsidian blade. Daily life was a rhythm of work and cleanliness. Unlike the Europeans of the same era who believed bathing opened the pores to disease, the Aztecs were obsessed with water. Most people bathed at least once a day in cold water. For health and purification, they used the temazcal, the steam bath. Imagine a small, low dome made of stone or adobe. Inside, it is dark and hot. Water is poured over heated volcanic stones, filling the small space with thick herbal steam. You sit there, sweating out the toxins of the body and the mind, chanting prayers to the goddess of the bath. When you emerge, red-faced and scrubbed clean, you feel reborn. Justice was swift and harsh, but it was also surprisingly fair. Even the highest judges could be executed if they were found taking a bribe. The law applied to everyone. A noble who committed a crime was often punished more severely than a commoner, for more was expected of him. This disciplined society produced goods and art that flowed into the greatest market in the Americas. If you followed the crowds, walking north from the religious precinct, you would eventually hear it. A low, steady hum. As you got closer, the hum would grow into a roar, like the sound of a rushing river or a distant storm. This was Tlaxcala. Originally a separate city, it had been absorbed into the capital, becoming its commercial hub. The market here was a staggering sight. The Spanish soldier, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who had seen the great markets of Rome and Constantinople, wrote that he had never seen anything like it. 60,000 people gathered here every single day. It was a city within a city, a vast open-air plaza paved with white stone and surrounded by arcades. The organization was meticulous. There was no chaos. The market was divided into streets, each dedicated to a specific type of good. There was a street for pottery, where jars and plates of every size were stacked in precarious towers. There was a street for woven mats and baskets. There was a street for gold, where dust was kept in transparent quills and jewelry glittered in the sun. The currency was not coins, but cacao beans. A rabbit might cost 30 beans, a turkey egg 3. For larger purchases, they used quachtly, standardized lengths of white cotton cloth. The merchants, known as the pochteca, were the lords of this domain. They were a guild unto themselves, traveling thousands of miles to the fringes of the known world. They brought back the luxury goods that the nobility craved. Imagine walking through the luxury section. Here you see the iridescent shimmer of green quetzal feathers brought from the cloud forests of the distant south. These feathers were worth more than gold. They were the symbol of divinity, shimmering with a life of their own. Beside them are jaguar skins, their rosettes bold and dark. There is jade, polished to a deep, watery green. The food section was a sensory explosion. The air was thick with the smell of roasting maize and spicy chilies. There were mountains of turkeys, ducks, and rabbits. There were baskets of insects, ants, grasshoppers, and the eggs of water, flies delicacies that were roasted and eaten with relish. There were stacks of tortillas, hot from the comal, and everywhere the smell of chocolate. The Aztecs drank their chocolate cold and spicy, whisked into a froth with vanilla, honey, and chili. It was a drink of power, an energy booster for the elite. But the market was also a place of order. At one end of the plaza stood a building where 12 judges sat in a continuous tribunal. If a dispute arose, a thief was caught, or a price was contested, the parties were dragged before the judges. The decision was made instantly. There were no long trials. Justice was dispensed on the spot, ensuring the smooth flow of commerce. Walking through Tlatelolco, you would feel the sheer vitality of the Aztec world. The cacophony of thousands of voices haggling in the Nahuatl language, a language of poetry and metaphor. The bright colors of the awnings, the sheer abundance of the earth brought to this one central point. It was a place where you could buy a slave to carry your wood or a gemstone to adorn your king. It was the engine of the empire, pumping wealth through the veins of the Triple Alliance. For a citizen walking these aisles, surrounded by the fruits of victory and the stability of the law, it must have felt like this golden age would last forever. The gods were fed, the armies were victorious, the canals were clean. But wealth and power often breed unease, and the emperor on the throne could feel the shadows lengthening. The cycle of the calendar was turning. The omens were appearing in the sky, and far away, across the great ocean, wooden towers were floating on the water, bringing a different kind of god and a different kind of war. Imagine walking through those bustling market aisles, surrounded by the scents of vanilla and chocolate. If you could buy one item from the great market of Tlatelolco, a jade amulet or a feathered cape, what would you choose? Tell me your choice in the comments below. When Moctezuma II took the throne, the wars continued. But the emperor's eyes were turned toward the mysterious signs in the sky. To understand the shadow that was about to fall across the valley, we must first understand the light that preceded it. The empire had reached its zenith under the previous ruler, the formidable Aztec. He was a conqueror who had pushed the boundaries of the Aztec world from the Pacific to the Gulf, and down into the steaming jungles of the south. But for the Mexica, war was not merely a matter of territory or resources. It was a theological necessity. It was a cosmic duty. This unique philosophy gave birth to one of the most fascinating and misunderstood concepts in history, the Ixtioyot, or the Flower Wars. These were not wars of destruction. They were wars of cultivation. The goal was not to kill the enemy on the battlefield, nor to seize their land. The goal was to take captives. In the Aztec worldview, the sun, Huitzilopochtli, was in a constant state of struggle against the darkness. To keep moving across the sky, to keep the universe from collapsing into eternal night, the sun needed energy. It needed the precious water. It needed blood. And so, the Aztec armies would march out to meet their eternal rivals, the Tlaxcalans. The Tlaxcalans lived in a state of encirclement, a sovereign territory completely surrounded by the Aztec Empire. They were kept alive, in a sense, as a reservoir for ritual combat. Imagine the scene of a flower war. It is not the chaotic, muddy slaughter of a European battlefield. It is a spectacle of color and ritual. The warriors are dressed in costumes that mimic the gods and the animals of power. There are the eagle knights, covered in feathers, their helmets shaped like open beaks. There are the jaguar knights, wearing the skins of the great cats. The banners, adorned with vibrant flowers and feathers, flutter in the wind. The combat itself is a display of immense skill. The primary weapon is the Makua Weedle, a wooden sword embedded with razor-sharp obsidian blades. It is a weapon capable of decapitating a horse, but here it is used with surgical precision to maim, to hamstrung, or to stun. The intent is to capture. You can hear the dull thud of the wooden clubs against the cotton armor, the ichkahipali. This armor is thick, soaked in brine to make it tough, yet light enough to allow for agility. The warriors dance around each other. When a man is captured, he is not treated with malice. He is treated with reverence. He has become a son of the sun. As the exhausted victor walks his captive back to Tenochtitlan, there is a solemn understanding that they are both playing their parts in a divine drama. This demand for tribute both in goods and in captives created a deep, simmering resentment in the provinces. The empire was vast, but it was brittle. The Templo Mayor was expanded and rededicated in 1487, a ceremony of such scale that the lines of prisoners waiting to be sacrificed stretched onto the causeways. The drums beat for 4 days and 4 nights without stopping. It was a display of absolute power, intended to terrify the world into submission. But terror is a fragile foundation for a state. When Ahitzotl passed, the throne went to his nephew, Moctezuma II. He was a different kind of man. He was not primarily a warrior, though he had led armies. He was a priest. He was a scholar. He was a man who spent long hours in the Comacac, studying the movements of the stars and the ancient prophecies. He was deeply superstitious, sensitive to the subtle currents of the spirit world. And the spirit world, it seemed, was screaming. In the decade leading up to the arrival of the Spanish, a series of terrified whispers began to spread through the streets of Tenochtitlan. These were the 8 omens, signs that the natural order was breaking down. The first omen appeared in the night sky. It was a great tongue of fire, a comet that did not vanish but lingered for a full year. It was shaped like a pyramid of flame, piercing the heavens at midnight. The people would gaze up at it in silence, watching its eerie glow reflect in the still waters of Lake Texcoco. It was a wound in the sky that would not heal. Then came the fire on earth. The temple of Huitzilopochtli, the most sacred place in the empire, burst into flames spontaneously. There was no lightning, no torch. The wooden pillars simply ignited. When the people ran with buckets of water to extinguish it, the water seemed only to feed the fire, making it roar louder. The third omen was a strike from the heavens. The temple of Xiuhtlacutli, the fire god, was built of straw. On a day with only a gentle rain and no thunder, a bolt of lightning struck it. It happened in silence. One moment the temple was there, the next it was ash. It was a sunstrike, a direct message from the gods. Then the natural world began to twist. Comets streamed through the sky in broad daylight, 3 at a time. The waters of the lake, usually calm, began to boil and foam without any wind. The water rose up in a surge, flooding the houses near the shore, as if the lake itself was trying to wash the city away. But the most chilling omens were the personal ones. In the dead of night, the wind would carry the sound of a woman weeping. Her voice was hollow and filled with an ancient grief. "Oh, my children, we are lost," she would wail. "Oh, my children, where can I take you?" This was the Siwakotl, the snake woman goddess, mourning the fate of her people before it had even happened. It is a story that lingers today in the legend of La Llorona. Then, fisherfolk on the lake caught a strange bird. It was the color of ash and had a mirror embedded in the center of its head. They brought it to Moctezuma. When the emperor looked into the mirror, he did not see his own reflection. He saw the night sky and the stars of the Gemini constellation. When he looked a second time, the vision changed. He saw people coming from the east. They were men, but they were riding on strange, hornless deer. They were dressed in gray metal and were making war. Moctezuma looked away in horror. When he looked back, the bird had vanished. The emperor fell into a deep, melancholic depression. He consulted his seers, but they could offer no comfort. He consulted the old books. He saw that the year was one Reed-sea a cattle. This was the year associated with the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Legend said that Quetzalcoatl had been exiled to the east, across the sea, but had promised to return to reclaim his throne. The year one Reed arrived in 1519, and precisely on schedule, messengers arrived from the coast. They were trembling. They reported seeing towers floating on the sea, great wooden houses with white clouds for wings. The gods had spoken. The floating towers landed, and the strangers began their march. The news traveled swiftly to the capital. These strangers were pale. They had hair on their faces. They carried sticks that spat fire and thunder, and they rode the giant deer that Moctezuma had seen in the mirror. These were the horses, animals unknown to the Americas, which the Aztecs initially thought were one being with the rider, terrifying centaur of flesh and iron. Moctezuma played a dangerous game. He sent gifts of gold to the coast, hoping to satisfy the strangers, hoping they would take the offering and leave. But gold does not satisfy greed. It only inflames it. The leader of the strangers, Hernán Cortés, saw the gold not as a tribute, but as a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the prize. Cortés began his ascent from the tropical coast up to the high plateau. He found willing allies, the Tlaxcalans. Those bitter, encircled enemies of the Aztecs saw a chance for revenge. They joined the Spanish. Thousands of native warriors marched alongside the few hundred Europeans. They climbed through the pass between the great volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. When the Spanish soldiers looked down into the Valley of Mexico for the first time, they were struck dumb. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier who wrote the history of the expedition, asked, "Is this a dream?" He compared the shimmering white city on the lake to the enchantments found in the romance novels of the time. It was vast, organized, and beautiful beyond their comprehension. The date was November 8, 1519. The meeting was set. The location was the causeway of Iztapalapa, the southern entrance to Tenochtitlan. It was a collision of two worlds that had been separated for tens of thousands of years. On one side came Moctezuma II. He was carried on a magnificent litter, a palanquin canopied with feathers and gold. He was dressed in the finest cotton, wearing the kapali quetzali, the headdress of shimmering green quetzal feathers. Nobles swept the ground before him, so his feet would not touch the dust. When he stepped down, golden sandals upon his feet, he was the embodiment of the sun on earth. On the other side stood Hernán Cortés. He was a man of iron. He wore a steel breastplate that gleamed dully in the high-altitude sun. He sat upon a horse, a beast of muscle and sweat that snorted and stamped on the pavement. The smell of the Spanish was the smell of old sweat, rust, and gunpowder. The smell of the Aztecs was of copal, incense, and flowers. They stood face to face. Cortés attempted to embrace the emperor, a breach of protocol that made the Aztec lords gasp and step forward. But Moctezuma stopped them. He allowed the stranger to come close. They exchanged gifts. Moctezuma placed a necklace of solid gold crabs around Cortés's neck. Cortés, in return, placed a necklace of glass beads, cheap Venetian glass, around the neck of the emperor. It was a tragic symbolism: gold for glass, real power for an illusion of friendship. Lord Cortés said, "You are in your own house." Moctezuma led them into the city. He housed them in the palace of Ixtlacatl, the home of his father. He treated them as honored guests, or perhaps as divine inevitabilities. For months, an uneasy peace held the city. The Spanish marveled at the markets and the zoos. They ate the food of the gods. But the tension was a taut wire, vibrating in the wind. The Spanish, vastly outnumbered, felt the precariousness of their position. They were trapped on an island, surrounded by thousands of warriors. Paranoia set in. In a bold and treacherous move, they seized Moctezuma, holding him hostage in his own palace. The emperor, paralyzed by his fatalism, submitted. He continued to rule, but with a Spanish sword at his back. The breaking point came during the festival of Toxcatl. Cortés had left the city to fight a rival Spanish faction on the coast, leaving his lieutenant Pedro de Alvarado in charge. Alvarado was a man of violence, not diplomacy. Seeing the nobles gathered in the temple courtyard for a dance, unarmed and covered in gold, he panicked. Or perhaps he just saw the gold. He ordered the doors closed. The massacre was brutal. The flower of the Aztec nobility was cut down in the sacred precinct. The blood of the dancers stained the stones of the temple. The city exploded. The illusion of the returning gods was shattered forever. These were not gods. They were murderers. The people rose up. They besieged the palace. Moctezuma was sent out to the rooftop to calm his people, to order them to lay down their arms. But it was too late. The spell was broken. A stone, thrown from the crowd, struck the emperor in the head. He died days later, whether from the wound or murdered by the Spanish as a useless pawn. History still debates. But with his death, the last restraint was gone. Peace could not last. The city revolted. The emperor fell, and the night of sorrows began. It was the night of June 30th, 1520, La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies tried to sneak out of the city under the cover of darkness and rain. They headed for the Tlacopan causeway, but the Aztecs had removed the bridges. The alarm was raised. The shell trumpets screamed into the rainy night. They are leaving. The murderers are leaving. Warriors poured out of the darkness. Canoes swarmed the causeway like wasps. The Spanish were weighed down by the gold they had stolen. Greed became their anchor. Men fell into the gaps in the causeway and sank like stones, drowned by the weight of the treasure they refused to abandon. The gap in the causeway was eventually filled with the bodies of men and horses, creating a grisly bridge for the survivors to scramble over. Cortés survived, weeping under a cypress tree as he watched his army destroyed. But he did not give up. He retreated to Tlaxcala, rebuilt his forces, and returned. This time, he did not come to visit. He came to erase. A new enemy entered the city before the soldiers did. It was invisible. It was Huey-Coatl, the Great Rash, smallpox. It had arrived with the Spanish. It swept through Tenochtitlan like a wildfire. It killed Cuitlahuac, the hero who had driven the Spanish out. It killed the priests, the generals, the mothers, and the children. The streets were piled with dead who could not be buried. In this apocalypse, a young man of 25 rose to lead. His name was Cuauhtémoc, the descending eagle. He was the final Tlatoani. He knew he could not win, but he chose to fight for the dignity of his people. The siege lasted 80 days. The Spanish cut the aqueducts, depriving the city of fresh water. They blockaded the causeways, stopping the food. They built brigantines, small warships, to dominate the lake. The fighting was house to house. The Aztecs fought with the fury of the cornered. Women went to the rooftops to rain stones down on the invaders. But hunger and thirst are enemies that no sword can defeat. The beautiful white city was slowly pulverized. The temples were smashed. The canals were filled with rubble. On August 13, 1521, the end came. Cuauhtémoc was captured in a canoe, trying to escape to continue the resistance. He was brought before Cortés. The young emperor was covered in the dust of his dying city. He looked the Spaniard in the eye, pointing to the dagger at Cortés's belt. "I have done my duty in defense of my city," Cuauhtémoc said. "I can do no more. Take that dagger from your belt and kill me now." Cortés refused, preferring to keep him as a trophy. But the request was a symbolic death. The sun of the Mexica had set. The silence that fell over the lake that evening was terrifying. Bernal Diaz wrote that for months they had lived with the constant noise of drums, screams, and trumpets. Now, suddenly, there was nothing. No sound, no movement. It was as if we had been deafened, he wrote. The great fires died down. The smoke drifted away over the mountains. The fifth sun had ended. The sun had set on the Aztec Empire. The great white city was dismantled stone by stone, sinking back into the mud from which it had risen. The stones of the great temple were used to build a cathedral for the new god. The canals were filled in to make streets for carriages. But as the fires died down and the noise of battle faded into history, something else remained. Not the gold, nor the temples, but the profound understanding of life that had guided them, the resilience, the poetry, the connection to the earth and the sky. The people did not vanish. They adapted. They survived. The Nahuatl language is still spoken today. The foods they cultivated, the corn, the chocolate, the tomato feed, the world. The spirit of the eagle and the cactus lives on, not in buildings of stone, but in the blood and memory of millions. And so we leave them there, in the quiet of the past. The stars wheel overhead, indifferent to the rise and fall of empires. The cool wind blows across the valley, carrying the scent of pine and old memories. Sleep well, travelers of the timeline, for the story is done, but the reflection is just beginning. And so we leave the fields of battle and the busy markets behind. We move now into the quiet halls of the mind, we enter the world of the spirit. The story of the Mexica is not just one of stone and gold. It is a story of deep thought. It is a story of how they saw the world. They lived in a universe that was always moving. They believed in a reality that was as thin as a mist. At the very top of the world, there is a place of peace. This is the 13th heaven. It is called Omeacan. It is the place of duality. Here, there is no noise. There is no struggle. There is only the beginning of all things. In this high place lives the great mystery. We call this mystery Untold. The name means to God. It is the dual divinity. Imagine a force that is both mother and father. It is the Lord and the Lady of our flesh. Untold is the source of all life. They are the Lord of duality. Untold. They are the Lady of duality. Omishudal. They sit together in the silence of the highest heaven. They are the one who is two. They are the two who are one. How do we understand such a thing? Think of a single coin. It has two sides, but it is one coin. Think of a breath. You must breathe in and you must breathe out. One cannot exist without the other. This is the heart of their world. Everything has a double. Everything has a balance. But Untold is not just a person. It is a dynamic energy. They called this energy Teatl. Teatl is like a river that never stops flowing. It is like a fire that is always burning. It is not a static being. It is a process. It is the very act of becoming. Teatl is the sacred power that moves through the grass. It moves through the stars. It moves through your own heart as you sleep. Do you ever wonder if this world is real? The Aztec wise ones wondered this every day. They felt that life was like a dream. They believed that we are only walking through a shadow. The only thing that is truly real is the divine energy. Everything else is a mask. Everything else is a disguise. They looked at the world and saw a constant change. There is day, and then there is night. There is life, and then there is death. There is the heat of the sun, and the cold of the moon. To the Mexica, these were not enemies. They were partners. They were the two parts of a whole. One cannot have the mountain without the valley. One cannot have the light without the shadow. They did not think in terms of good versus evil. That is a very different way of seeing. Instead, they thought of order and chaos. They thought of balance and imbalance. A forest fire is not evil. It is simply a moment of chaos. The rain is not good. It is simply a moment of order. The goal of a wise person was to walk in the middle. The goal was to find the balance. Think of the universe as a great tree. It has roots that go down deep. It has branches that reach up high. This is how they saw the vertical world. There are 13 levels of heaven above us. Each one is a different home for the gods. Each one is a different layer of light. At the very bottom is the place of the stars. At the very top is the place of the two. Below us, there are 9 levels of the underworld. This is not a place of punishment. It is simply the place of the dead. It is the place where things go to rest. It is a place of cold and quiet. It is the roots of the tree. To understand the world, you must know both the roots and the branches. You must know the dark and the light. But the world also moves sideways. There are 4 cardinal directions. There is the east, where the sun is born. It is the place of red. There is the north, the place of the ancestors. It is the place of black. There is the west, where the sun goes to die. It is the place of white. And there is the south, the place of life and growth. It is the place of blue. In the very center of these four directions is the home of man. It is the center of the cross. This is where we live. We are the point where all forces meet. We are the place where the heavens and the underworld touch. It is a heavy burden to live in the center. We must keep the balance for the whole world. Imagine a priest standing on a high temple. The wind is blowing softly. He watches the stars turn in the black sky. He sees the smoke of a small fire rising up. The smoke curls and twists. It moves higher and higher. It reaches for the 13th heaven. The priest knows that he is small. He knows that his life is short, but he is part of the great energy of Teotl. This awareness of how short life is changed everything. It made them love beauty in a deep way. They knew that flowers wither. They knew that birds die. They knew that even the great sun would one day stop, because life is fleeting, it is precious. This gave birth to their most beautiful idea. They called it in Shakatl. These words mean flower and song. It is their word for poetry. It is their word for art. They believed that the earth is a place of masks. Nothing here is permanent. Words can be lies. Faces can be hidden. But poetry is different. Poetry is the only way to speak the truth. It is the only way to touch the divine. There was a great king named Nezahualcoyotl. He was the king of the city of Texcoco. He was a warrior, but he was also a poet. He is known as the Poet King. He would sit in his gardens for hours. He would watch the water in the fountains. He would smell the scent of the flowers. He thought about the meaning of life. He wrote a poem that people still read today. He asked a simple question: do we really live on earth? He answered it himself: not forever on earth, only a little while here. He compared our lives to beautiful things. He said that even jade shatters. He said that even gold breaks. He said that even the feathers of the quetzal bird are torn. We are like a song that is sung once. We are like a flower that blooms in the morning and dies at night. This might sound sad to us, but for the Poet King, it was beautiful. It meant that every moment is a gift. It meant that we should fill our lives with color. We should fill our lives with music. We should treat each other with kindness while we are here. The wise ones were called the Tlamatinum. They would gather in the palaces. They would sit on mats and talk for days. They would play the turtle shell drum. The sound was soft and rhythmic. Thump, thump. It was the heartbeat of the earth. They would play the bone flute. The melody was long and mournful. It sounded like the wind. They spoke about the face and the heart. In Ishtli, in Yalatal. To them, your face was your personality. It was how the world saw you. Your heart was your soul. It was your true self. A good person was someone who had a wise face and a strong heart. They believed that we are not born with a soul. We must create one. We create it through art. We create it through poetry. Think of a jade bead. It is hard and green. It takes a long time to carve. A craftsman must be very patient. He must use fine sand and water. He must rub the stone until it shines. Our lives are like that stone. We must rub away the rough edges. We must make our hearts shine like jade. When the sun sets over the palace walls, the light turns to gold. The air smells of marigolds. These are the flowers of the dead. Their orange petals catch the last light. The wise ones watched this every day. They accepted the end of things. They knew that the wheel of time never stops. It turns for the stars, and it turns for us. Time was not a straight line for the Mexica. It was not a road that goes on forever. Instead, time was a great wheel. It was a circle that always returns to the beginning. They had 2 different calendars. This is very complex, but it is also very beautiful. The first calendar was for the sun. It was called the Sheepawali. It had 365 days. It followed the seasons. It told the farmers when to plant the corn. It told them when the rains would come. It was the rhythm of the earth. It was the heartbeat of the soil. The second calendar was for the spirit. It was called the tonal poali. This was the sacred count. It had only 260 days. It was used for magic. It was used for naming children. It was used to see the future. This calendar did not follow the sun. It followed a different, secret rhythm. Imagine these 2 calendars as 2 great gears made of stone. One gear is large, the other gear is small. They turn together, tooth by tooth. Every day, a new combination of signs is made. It takes 52 years for the gears to return to the exact same spot. This 52-year cycle was their century. They called it the Shumopili, the binding of the years. Every 52 years, the world was in danger. The Mexica believed that the sun might not rise again. They believed the universe might run out of energy. They had to prove their devotion to keep the world going. This was the time of the new fire ceremony. It was a night of absolute terror and absolute hope. When the last day of the 52 years came, all fires were put out. Every single flame in the empire was extinguished. The hearths in the homes were made cold. The torches in the temples were darkened. The streets were black. The people climbed onto their roofs. They waited in the silence. They watched the sky. They looked for a group of stars called the Pleiades. They believed that if these stars crossed the center of the sky, the world would be saved. Can you imagine that darkness? No candles, no lamps, only the cold light of the stars. The silence must have been heavy. Mothers held their children tight. Everyone held their breath. High on a mountaintop, the priests waited. When the stars reached the center, they struck a spark. They used a wooden fire drill. They spun the wood until a tiny ember appeared. This was the new fire. It was the birth of a new age. A great bonfire was lit. The people on the roofs saw the light on the mountain. They cheered. They cried with joy. Runners would take torches from that fire. They would run down the mountain. They would run through the valleys. They would carry the flame to every temple. They would carry it to every home. Soon the whole empire was glowing again. The world had been reborn. The sun would rise tomorrow. The circle had started over. They believed this had happened many times before. They believed there were 4 worlds before this one. Each world was called a sun. Each one had been destroyed by a different force. The first was destroyed by jaguars, the second by wind, the third by fire, the fourth by water. We are living in the 5th world. It is the 5th sun. Our world is called the sun of movement. Its sign is Nohui Olin, or for earthquake. They believed our world would end when the earth shook too hard. This is why the calendar was so important. They had to watch the rhythm. They had to keep the gods happy. They had to make sure the 5th sun kept shining. But while the stars turned, life on the ground was simple. It was quiet. It was warm. Away from the great temples, the common people lived in small houses. These houses were made of sun-dried mud or wood. They had roofs made of grass. Inside, there was a single room. It was a place of family. It was a place of safety. In the center of every home was the hearth. There were 3 stones arranged in a triangle. This was the home of the old god of fire, Huatotl. He was the most ancient of all gods. He was the grandfather of the world. He was the fire that cooked the food. He was the fire that kept the family warm on a cold night. Every morning, the sound of the house began. It was a rhythmic slapping sound. Slap, slap, slap. This was the sound of a woman making tortillas. They called them tlaxcali. She would take the corn dough and shape it with her hands. She would cook it on a flat clay griddle. The smell of toasted corn filled the air. It is a smell that has not changed in 1,000 years. The people ate simply. They had corn and beans. They had squash and bright red chilies. They had tomatoes and sweet potatoes. This was the food of the earth. It was a gift from the gods. They ate together, sitting on mats made of reeds. These mats were called pedestal. They were the furniture of the house. They were the chairs and the beds. When a child was born, there was a great ceremony. The midwife would wash the baby in water. She would speak to the baby softly. If it was a boy, she would give him a tiny shield and bow. She would tell him he was a warrior. If it was a girl, she would give him a tiny broom and a spindle. She would tell him he was the heart of the home. The umbilical cord was buried with care. For a boy, it was buried in a battlefield. For a girl, it was buried near the hearth. This tied the child to their duty. It tied them to their destiny. The elders would then give the child advice. They would speak with great wisdom. They called this the Huatotl, the ancient words. They told the children to be humble. They told them to be clean. They told them to respect the old people. They told them to work hard and not to complain. They believed that a good person was like a well-woven cloth. Every thread must be strong. Every color must be in the right place. This was how you built a heart of jade. The home was a place of order. Every morning, the women would sweep the floors. They would sweep the courtyard. This was not just for cleanliness. It was a holy act. It was a way to sweep away chaos. It was a way to keep the world organized. By sweeping the dirt, they were helping the gods keep the universe turning. Even death was seen as a journey. For the common people, death meant a trip to Mictlan. This was the land of the dead. It was a long road. It took 4 years to get there. The soul had to pass through many dangers. They had to cross deep rivers and climb mountains of knives. But they were not alone. They were buried with a small dog to lead the way. Once they reached the end, they found rest. They went back into the earth. They became part of the cycle again. For those who died in battle, or mothers who died in childbirth, the path was different. They went to the house of the sun. They became birds. They became butterflies. They lived in the light forever. The empire of stone is gone now. The great temples are broken. The gold was melted down long ago, but the people did not disappear. Their blood still flows in millions of people today. And more importantly, their words are still here. Their language is called Nahuatl. It is a language of music and soft sounds. Over 1.5 million people still speak Nahuatl today. It is a living thing, but even if you do not speak it, you use its words every day. When you say the word chocolate, you are speaking Nahuatl. They called it chocolately. It was their bitter, sacred drink. It was the drink of kings. When you eat a tomato, you use their word, tomato. When you eat an avocado, you use the word avocado. The coyote that howls in the desert is the coyote. The chili that burns your tongue is the chili. The ocelot in the jungle is the ocelotl. These words are like tiny seeds. They have traveled across the centuries. Nahuatl is a poetic language. It is a language where words are built like towers. You can add many parts together to make one long word. It is a very polite language too. They have special ways of speaking to elders. They have words that show great respect. It is a language that sounds like the rustling of dry leaves. Think of the soft sound of the letters T and L together. Tlaxcali Ocelotl. It is a gentle click. It is a sound that belongs to the mountains of Mexico. It is the sound of the wind through the corn stalks. When you hear it, you are hearing the voice of the fifth sun. You are hearing the voice of a people who saw the beauty in the fleeting moment. The taste of a ripe tomato is a gift from them. The creamy texture of an avocado is their legacy. The way we see the stars is still touched by their wonder. The empire did not truly end. It just changed its shape. It moved from the world of stone into the world of words. It moved from the palace into the kitchen. The people of the sun knew that everything ends. They knew that empires fall. They knew that flowers wither. But they also knew that the wheel turns back. They knew that the sun would always rise as long as we remembered the balance. They knew that poetry could bridge the gap between the earth and the sky. So, as you drift toward sleep, remember the poet king. Remember his gardens and his songs. Think of the jade that breaks and the feathers that tear. But think also of the new fire. Think of the light returning to the darkness. The world is a place of duality. It is a place of night and day. It is a place of shadow and gold. The voices of the ancients are still on our tongues. Every time we taste chocolate, we are connected to them. Every time we see a coyote, we see their world. The empire of stone has vanished, but the empire of words remains. It is whispering softly across the centuries. It is a bridge of sound. It spans from their time to ours. We are all living under the fifth sun. We are all walking in the center of the four directions. We are all trying to find the balance. We are all making our hearts into jade. The wheel of time keeps turning. The stars keep moving across the sky. And the world remains a place of mystery. It remains a place of flower and song. Sleep now and listen to the rhythm of the wheel. Listen to the soft sound of the ancient words. Let the smoke of history carry you away. You are part of the story. You are part of the song. The sun has set, but the new fire is waiting. The circle is complete. The world is at peace. Close your eyes now and breathe deeply. Let the weight of the day settle into the ground beneath you. We are going back to a place of absolute stillness. We are going to a place where time is measured in layers of dust and stone. We are traveling to the heart of the modern city, but we are looking down. We are looking far beneath the pavement. We are looking for the secrets that the earth has held for 500 years. For a long time, the great temple of the Aztecs was a ghost. It was a memory buried under the foundations of a new world. People walked over it every day. They drove their cars over it. They built their homes over it. They did not know that a mountain of history was sleeping just a few feet below their boots. The city was a blanket of concrete. It was a heavy and silent cover. But the past has a way of coming back. It has a way of reaching up through the soil. In the year 1978, the month was February. It was a cold and quiet night in the city. A group of men were working for the electric company. They were digging a hole near the great cathedral. The street was dark. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of their tools. They were looking for cables. They were looking for the pulse of the modern world. Suddenly, a shovel hit something hard. It was not a pipe. It was not a stone from a building. It made a deep and hollow sound. The workers stopped. They cleared away some of the mud. They used their hands to brush away the wet earth. Slowly, a shape began to emerge. It was a massive piece of volcanic rock. It was round, like a moon. It was heavy with the weight of centuries. They did not know it yet, but they had found a masterpiece. They had found the goddess Koilzokwi. Her name means she of the bells. As the workers cleaned the stone, they saw her face. She had bells carved on her cheeks. Her body was shown in pieces. She was a goddess of the moon. In the old stories, she had been defeated by her brother. She had been cast down from the top of the sacred mountain. Imagine the silence of that night. The workers stood in the pit. The pale light of the moon shone down on the stone moon below. The past had broken through the pavement. The news spread quickly. The city stopped and looked down. Archaeologists came with soft brushes and careful hands. They realized that this stone was not alone. It was the doorstep of a giant. It was the first step of the great temple. This stone was over 3 meters wide. It was a circle of red volcanic rock. Even after 500 years, you could see traces of color. There was a faint yellow. There was a bit of bright red. There was the ghost of white paint. The goddess lay there in her eternal rest. She was exactly where the Aztecs had put her. She was at the bottom of the long stairs. She was the place where the earth met the sky. This discovery changed everything. It started a project that would last for decades. They called it the Templo Mayor Project. The archaeologists began to dig with great patience. They did not use machines. They used small trowels. They used tiny brushes made of soft hair. They moved through the earth grain by grain. Each handful of dirt was a page of a book. Each layer of mud was a year of history. As they dug deeper around the goddess, the earth began to offer up gifts. These were not just stones. These were messages. They were caches of sacred objects. The Aztecs had buried them as offerings. They were like time capsules, sealed in stone boxes. When the lids were lifted, the smell of damp earth filled the air. It was a smell that had been trapped since the time of the kings. They found boxes filled with the treasures of the sea. There were thousands of shells. Some were small and white like pearls. Others were large and pink like the inside of a sunset. There were conch shells from the Atlantic Ocean. There were thorny oysters from the Pacific. These items had traveled hundreds of miles. They had been carried over high mountains. They had been brought to the center of the world. Think of the texture of these shells. They are smooth and cold to the touch. Some are as thin as paper. Others are thick and heavy. Why were they here? The Mexica believed the underworld was a watery place. It was a realm of mist and shadows. By burying these shells, they were bringing the ocean to the temple. They were making a home for the gods of rain and water. They found branches of coral. The coral was rough and dry. It looked like the bones of a frozen tree. There were the snouts of sawfish. They were long and sharp with rows of teeth. There were the skeletons of crocodiles. These animals had been brought from the hot jungles. They were laid to rest in the dark soil of the high valley. They were messengers from the edge of the world. In one box, they found something truly amazing. It was the skeleton of a jaguar. The great cat was lying on its side. It looked like it was sleeping, but it was not alone. It was dressed in beauty. There were beads of green jade around its neck. There were copper bells on its legs. The jaguar was a warrior of the night. Even in death, it was protected by the most precious stones. Jade is a wonderful stone. It is cold when you first touch it, but it warms up in your hand. It has a deep and quiet green color. It looks like the leaves of a forest after a rain. To the Aztecs, jade was more valuable than gold. It was the color of life. It was the color of growing corn. In the dark caches of the temple, the green jade gleamed. It stood out against the white of the bone. The archaeologists worked in a world of silence. They counted every shell. They mapped every bone. They treated each object with a quiet respect. They were looking at a cosmogram. Each box was a map of the universe. The shells were the water. The jaguar was the earth. The jade was the spirit. Everything was in its proper place. Everything was in balance. Among the shells and the jade, they found the warriors of the sky. To the north of the main temple, they found a special building. It was called the House of the Eagles. This was a place for the highest soldiers. It was a place of meditation. It was a place where the elite whispered their secrets. When the earth was cleared away, the statues were waiting. These were the eagle warriors. They were life-sized statues made of fired clay. Imagine a man standing tall. He is wearing a helmet that looks like the head of an eagle. His face peeks out from the open beak. On his arms, he has great wings made of ceramic. The feathers are carved with incredible detail. You can see every line. You can see every curve of the wing. The clay is smooth and cool. It has a reddish-brown color. The statues have a strange and powerful texture. Their skin looks like it is stretched tight. This was a style meant to show the power of the god Totec. The statues have hollow eyes. They look out at you with a steady gaze. They have been staring into the darkness for centuries. Now they stand in the light of the museum. The House of the Eagles was a beautiful place. The archaeologists found long benches along the walls. The benches were carved with pictures of warriors marching. They were painted in many colors. There was blue and red and yellow. The warriors were moving toward a sacred brazier. These were large clay pots used for burning incense. The smell of copal would have filled this room. Copal is a resin from a tree. When it burns, it makes a thick and sweet white smoke. It smells like pine and honey. The smoke would rise up to the ceiling. It would drift around the heads of the eagle warriors. In the quiet of the excavation, you can almost imagine that scent. You can almost hear the soft footsteps of the priests on the polished floor. But the temple also held darker mysteries. It held the story of the end of life. From the warriors of the eagle, we move to the resting place of the ancestors. In the year 2015, the archaeologists found something that shocked the world. They found the Huey Sampantli. This was the Great Wall of Skulls. It was a structure made of human bone and stone. This was not a pile of bones thrown away. It was a careful piece of architecture. It was a tower made of skulls. The skulls were held together with a mortar. The mortar was made of lime and sand and volcanic gravel. It was a hard and gray material. The skulls were arranged in a circle. They were all looking inward. They were looking at each other in an eternal circle. The work of the archaeologists here was very slow. They used the smallest brushes. They moved the dirt away, flake by flake. They found hundreds of skulls. But they found something surprising. It was not just the skulls of young men. There were women. There were children. This changed what we knew about the temple. it was not just about war, it was about something deeper. To the Mexica, these skulls were not scary. They were not a symbol of evil. They were the seeds of life. They were the foundation of the world. They believed that by giving these lives to the gods, they were keeping the sun moving. They were making sure the rain would fall. The bone was white and clean. It was a sacred material. It was a gift to the earth. The archaeologists worked with a heavy sense of time. They catalogued each skull with a number. They measured the teeth. They looked at the marks on the bone. They found that some skulls had been modified. They had holes on the sides. This was so they could be placed on wooden poles. They would stand in the sun as a message to the world. The atmosphere in this part of the dig was very quiet. There was a feeling of deep respect. These were people who had lived and breathed. They had loved their families. They had walked through the markets. Now, they were part of the sacred mountain. They were part of the stone. The circles of bone were perfect geometry. They were a map of the cycle of life and death. All these layers are resting now. They are safe under the glass of the museum. But you can still feel them in the city. Tenochtitlan is not gone. It is just sleeping. It is a giant made of stone and clay. It lies beneath the busy streets of the modern capital. The city is built in layers like a great cake, and each layer has its own story. The final visualization is one of depth. Imagine you are standing in the center of the city. You are in the great square called the Zocalo. Above you is the blue sky. Around you are the modern buildings. You hear the hum of the traffic. You hear the voices of the people. This is the top layer. It is the world of now. It is the world of movement. Now, look down through the pavement. A few feet below is the colonial city. This is the world of the Spanish. You can see the foundations of the old houses. You can see the stones of the cathedral. These stones are heavy and gray. They were taken from the Aztec temples. They were moved by hand. They have been sitting there for 400 years. They are the middle layer. Now, look deeper still. Go down 10 feet. Go down 20 feet. Here is the world of the Mexica. This is the red stone called Untold. It is a volcanic rock that is full of holes. It is light, but very strong. You can see the stairs of the Templo Mayor. You can see the statues of the serpents. You can see the goddess of the moon. This is the bottom layer. It is the foundation of everything. The city is sinking. Mexico City was built on a lake. The ground is soft and wet. Because of this, the heavy buildings are slowly going down. This subsidence is what reveals the past. The earth is squeezing the history back to the surface. Sometimes, a new crack in the sidewalk will show a piece of ancient carving. Sometimes, a new subway line will find a temple to the wind god. There are windows in the street now. You can walk along the sidewalk and look down through a thick glass floor. You can see the ruins in the dark earth. You can see the light reflecting off the old stones. It is like looking through a window in time. You are standing in the year 2026, but your eyes are looking at the year 1400. The two worlds are touching. The three eras live together. They call this the Plaza of the Three Cultures. You can see the Aztec ruins. You can see the Spanish church. You can see the modern apartment buildings. They all stand in the same place. They all share the same air. They are all part of the same mountain of time. The layers of history are like a blanket. They press down and keep the secrets warm. At night, the museum is very still. The crowds are gone. The lights are low. The stone gods sit in the shadows. The eagle warriors stand at attention. The shells from the sea rest in their boxes. There is no sound here. There is only the feeling of weight. There is only the feeling of endurance. These things have survived the fire. They have survived the flood. They have survived the silence. The red Tezontle stone is everywhere. It is in the Aztec walls. It is in the colonial palaces. It is the color of the heart of the city. It is a dark and earthy red. It looks like dried clay. It feels rough under your fingers. It is the skin of the city. Whether it was carved by an Aztec master or a Spanish mason, the stone is the same. It comes from the same volcanoes. It belongs to the same earth. As you breathe in the cool night air, imagine you are standing on top of this mountain. You are on top of the layers of history. You can feel the strength of the stones beneath your feet. You can feel the stories whispering in the wind. The hum of the modern city is fading now. It is becoming a distant drone. It sounds like the buzzing of a bee. It is far away and unimportant. The only thing that matters is the rhythm of the earth. The only thing that matters is the steady passage of time. The great city is sleeping. The eagle has landed. The sun has set. The noise of the market is gone. It has been replaced by the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. We are leaving the Mexica now. We are leaving them to their rest. They are safe in their history. They are part of the deep earth, and you are safe in the present. You are resting in the comfort of your own bed. The layers of time are like a heavy quilt. They are warm and soft. They cover the past and the present. They keep us all together in the great circle of the world. The excavations will continue. There are still many boxes to open. There are still many stones to find. The city will keep giving up its secrets, but for now, everything is still. The archaeologists have put away their brushes. The museum doors are locked. The moon goddess is watching over the silence. She is she of the bells, and she is at peace. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for looking down into the dark earth. Thank you for listening to the story of the fifth sun. The world is a vast and wonderful place. It is full of mysteries that are waiting to be found. But those mysteries can wait for tomorrow. Tonight, there is only the quiet. Tonight, there is only the rest. The empire of stone has become an empire of dreams. The warriors are made of clay. The gods are made of volcanic rock. And you are made of the stars. Let yourself drift now. Let yourself sink into the layers of sleep. The journey is over. The fire has been lit. The new age is beginning in your heart. The eagle is still. The serpent is quiet. The lake is calm. Everything is as it should be. The balance has been found. The center of the world is right here where you are. You are the point where all directions meet. You are the place where the heavens and the earth touch. You are at home. You are safe. As you fall deeper into sleep, remember the smell of the marigolds. Remember the glint of the jade. Remember the sound of the soft rain on the grass. The world is turning. The stars are moving. And the great city of Tenochtitlan is sleeping beneath you. It is a guardian of the past. It is a promise for the future. Sleep now and dream of the high valleys. Dream of the blue water and the green trees. Dream of the flowers and the songs. The words of the ancients are a lullaby. They are a bridge of sound that carries you away. They are a gift from the people of the sun. They are yours to keep. The night is long and peaceful. The shadows are kind. The earth is steady. You are resting in the heart of history. You are resting in the lap of the gods. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. Good night, brave traveler. Sleep well, and may your dreams be as vast and beautiful as the sky over Aztlan.